Hey, g'day. Welcome back to People Purpose Place for our lunchtime conversations. This week we're back with the regular three amigos. We've got Christine and Darren and myself, Rowan Blizzard. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon. And Rowan's obviously piloting the ship without CJ here today. So well done for soldiering on through the technological nightmare that is the internet.
You know I'm a fan of the technology, so all good. All good.
You're pretty good at it. Thank heavens you're here.
Well, we're getting there. Old dogs and new tricks, I reckon.
Yeah, it's a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah. So for today, we wanted to model our practice. We had a trial run of this earlier today and it only took us 3 hours. So it's a weighty topic. Perhaps we should jump straight into our check-in for today. Like everything, labels get attached to things. And when we say builders, what immediately comes to your mind? And secondly, do you have a sense the word is positive or negative in most people's leaning? Christine, did you want to start with that?
You know, the first thing that jumped into mind was a picture of Bob the Builder. Now, that is ridiculous because I've never had children. I never watched Bob the Builder. How is it possible that a cultural
And there we go. We've just had a glitch.
It looks like it's Christine's end though, isn't it? With that Alexa, does that sort of say that it's her end, not our end?
Christine's just run out of signal for now. Darren, did you want to jump into the question?
Yeah.
Perhaps a bit loaded, given that you're.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, I always have perceived that most people's idea of a builder is someone swinging a hammer, right? So,
yeah.
But because I see the industry very differently, I suppose it's worth just communicating the two different versions. Is one is the way that I see it, and one is the way that I think other people see it because I've been that practitioner. So, I think the world sees building as the person on the tools with swinging a hammer. I know that the person who's the builder these days is primarily in control of a greater system. They're generally the manager at a larger scale. So the idea that most people are the practitioner builder is just not generally how most large-scale construction happens. The other thing, and this might be my only, and I get again looking at it from my own view, but I have the perception that most people see builders, and this is coming from an industry background, as being a little bit unprofessional. And I don't think that it's held with the importance it should be. So I think builders are sort of perceived as being, she'll be right sort of stuff, and but not very professional. And I think that almost comes with a negative connotation that that might be my own version of it, but that's just purely me looking from the outside in. And I think Christine got cut off a bit. So you were talking about Bob the Builder and how weird it is that comes up as an iconic view of a builder, which is a little bit like mine, but different.
Christine.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it's different to yours, but I just think it's an odd thing that we need to think about during this deep conversation because, in fact, we're also affected by cultural icons, by the thoughts that we're used to thinking, and how is it possible that I, with no relationship to Bob the Builder, came up with Bob the Builder?
Yeah.
And I think this is really important for what we have to say. There was a second part to the question. What was the second part of the question, Rowan, please?
And so do you have a sense that it's a positive or a negative thing? So is your impression of Bob the Builder a positive or a negative?
you know, Bob the Builder, cute, but builders as a profession, I don't know that I do have a very good impression of builders as a profession. No.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think it touches a little bit on what you've been saying, Darren.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a bit of a felt sense for me being in the industry, is that it's a very intense industry and there's a lot of pressure in there. But I get the feeling, I always had the feeling that most people perceive builders as being unprofessional, and yeah, so I think that feeds into that, and I think some of that is because most people's perception is they are Bob the Builder on the tools, and that doesn't translate to anything else other than being a good practitioner. And I have to be a little bit careful of that. You know what you said there, and something we talk about all the time is this our brain's doing shortcuts here, right? You know, so is the heuristic I've just painted, is that just me painting a picture that no one else sees? I don't know. What do you think, Rowan?
Yeah, for a check-in question, we're struggling to get through it, but that's part of the issue.
Great check-in question.
That's exactly part of the issue.
Yeah.
We have a perception, and I think it's true of any group we want to think about. We see the media about a poorly behaving NRL player, and then we immediately jump to all NRL players are ratbags. Well, that's
good
true.
point.
But most other, no, it's not true. Clearly, there will be a few in any group who are outliers, positive and negative. So there will be Rhodes Scholars builders who are highly intellectual, emotionally attuned, and altruistic. That might only be a very few. And there will be a group who are ratbags. We hear about them on 60 Minutes. And, you know, hey, see you later. I'm not going to finish that house or whatever. So that's the spectrum of all humans. But generally, I think Darren's roughly right that my perception of a builder, and perhaps this is persuaded by my working history of interacting in a professional sense with builders, is these guys are managers of systems. They're not typically, and some of them are really ordinary systems, like a beer coaster for quoting and a piece of fibre cement for purchase orders is not a very elaborate system.
Yeah.
But it is a system.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good perspective too, I think, Rowan, to be able to say that's very good, is that we are, you know, just the same as we stereotype football players as X, we would probably put builders in the same bundle. And it's interesting that Christine's got a different perspective, but the same, you know, in the fact that, you know, Bob the Builder, being the person with a hard hat on and a swing and a hammer, is what might jump to brain, rather than someone who's running an elaborate managerial system, which is what it probably is today. And I think maybe that's potentially a good segue into quite a complex conversation, which is, I think, from both of your tutelage this morning, where we can obviously break this down into be a little bit simpler for today's version, with some deep dive to maybe occur in the future. And I think it was poignant that this episode is actually about collaboration in building and how that might work as a part of the people, purpose, place system or framework. And that's looking at things in a different perspective. And I think it's obviously the first question, the first check-in, has made us actually, you know, ponder about this person we're supposedly collaborating with. If we've already got a perception that they're highly unorganized, operating out of a whatever, then we're going to find it more difficult, or we might find a challenge to come to a place where we can work together better. So this episode is about collaborating and building and potentially the challenges that exist with the current system. And this was ironically, when I turned on the TV last night, everything that we've just talked about was perpetuated by 60 Minutes. So anyone can go on there literally last night, and you'll see this horror story about this builder who's shonky. They use this word shonky with builders quite a bit. And then all the, flow on ramifications. So what I thought about doing was just give some summary understanding of what I think, or what we potentially think collaboration could actually mean from a philosophical point of view, and then get some deep dive down lower than that into what it could mean as an actual project, and maybe talk specifically to what we're attempting to do with Gin Road as a project, to say where all of these toolbox ideas that we're working with, we're not just communicating them, we're actually trying them, right? And that may be successful, that may be unsuccessful. But we do believe if we're going to try for no longer doing business as usual, that we have to model that not only with the check-in question, but even with the way we engage with the people who we actually build with. So to start on this journey, which hopefully doesn't end up in too many rabbit holes, my next sort of touch is just briefly to touch on where some of this thinking might have come from, which is actually a philosopher called Martin Heidegger. Are either of you at all familiar with any of Heidegger's work, Christine?
Yeah. But of course, years ago I tried Heidegger in German, couldn't penetrate a word. Didn't do much better in English, although I understand how important he is to philosophy moving forward, the history of philosophy, phenomenology, heuristics. He was a very important philosopher. However, I've taken that from philosophers and historians, not from Heidegger himself, because I couldn't penetrate that shit.
Yeah.
It's too hard.
Yeah. Do you have any understanding of him, Rowan? Is it sort of a...
No, it's not something that I've crossed paths with, but it's on my list of things to do. And maybe if I could just really briefly jump backward to talk about what does collaboration actually mean. So we have an advantage that we've done some training 8 years ago now. It's actually quite a while ago. And a framework called the Collaborative Operating System. But the world in general doesn't use collaboration. It uses a hierarchy. There's a boss, there's an authority. And within that structure, and hierarchies work in certain circumstances really, really well. Building's on fire, you want a bloke with a red hat to point to the exit and everyone follow that instruction, no argument. Works really well. Military, churches, there are places where hierarchy works really, really well. There's a lot of places that there could actually be much better systems, and collaboration is one of them.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a little bit of where we get to by the end of this episode, hopefully we get there, it is a little bit of a backtracking to understand what collaboration is and how it could work. And then how could it be applied to the construction industry and particularly with building projects, and maybe why the existing system doesn't work. And I agree with you. One of the things we might just briefly go through this and only try and touch on these points, because we hope that with our toolkit, which is what people would embrace people, purpose, place with, there's a level of, like we did, I think, very clearly with the collaborative operating system, when we did that training, we picked up certain elements which we've been able to implement all the time, right? Now, not always did we know why those elements worked. We just knew they worked, right? So it's only when you dig deeper, you go, okay, well, I get this idea of explicitness versus implicitness, and I have historically been bad at implicit conversation. So talking generally, assuming most people know what I'm talking about, which is not the case without increased explicitness. And this idea of a framework of rules that we all agree to, so we have buy-in. So this is exactly the same conversation with collaboration, I think. So just to briefly touch on why Heidegger sits in that realm, and what we might do is when we go to post this back onto YouTube, I might see whether Colby can actually post the links down below so people can go and follow these threads by themselves, because we don't need to dive holistically into Heidegger's thinking. But just to summarize,
it's heavy work.
just to summarize why this interacts with collaboration is Heidegger come up with this, and I also need to cite Steve March from Aletheia Coaching in this situation, because I'm the same. I haven't dug really deep into Heidegger's work, because, as you said, it is incredibly deep in its breadth. So we also have this situation that Heidegger is far from not being a flawed person, because it turns out he was involved in the Nazi Party and all of these other things. So like ourselves, like our own journey, there's flaws in amongst everything. But pulling out the strong bits, he came up with this concept essentially that we attune to each other in certain manner. It's natural that we attune, whatever that attunement is, depending on is where you are at your point. So two attunements that he acknowledged and saw. One was a technological attunement, which basically used the idea that, which he saw from the 1930s when technology, as he understood it, was being introduced, which was this idea that technology is capacity at waiting. So the idea that you can produce more than what you can by having this capacity at ready to be able to be implemented. And his concern with technological attunement was, as humans, we would start to treat each other as technologies. So as a simple example of that is, I need something from you, you need something from me. That would be a technological passing. And that could be explained as simple as we go to the grocery store and we see the person across from us and we see them as technology. So you need to run through this stuff for me, and then I will pay you as a transaction. So we've almost started to treat humans as bits of technology. And he was really concerned about this. And
in the 1930s.
In the 1930s. And when we think about it, this idea of transaction-based understanding, to me, this is at the heart of everything that is currently in the construction mechanism. So would you think that would be right, Rowan? Is the construction industry very much about what's in it for me and what's in it for you, and how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's very much the win-lose transactional sort of nature of interaction. So we have an interaction and there's one that comes out on top and one that doesn't. And that's commerce or a very typical construction response.
But that's partly, if you go back to Heidegger, it's partly because we have become transactional, and the only way to run a transactional society is to start with a hierarchy, a very authoritarian hierarchy. And we're very hierarchical. Even those of us who have done things like the collaborative operating system and learned collaboration, it's deeper than learning. It's really hard to teach us, and especially people who are as old as I am, because we're that much closer to Heidegger.
Well, and I think the other thing is the system holds us there, doesn't it? Like we're using a banking system which is highly, hierarchical. We're using a construction system which has even in the builder and then the subcontractors, and they're called subcontractors for a reason. Like there's sub meaning lower than. So there's all of these things that are happening. It's almost like now, maybe Heidegger's concern was we were creating a culture which promoted technological attunement to everyone and everything. And I think that's epitomized by the construction industry, which is very much, as you said, even the relationship between suppliers and builders. I mean, you've seen both sides, Rowan, of seeing how that works, and you get the feeling like, on some level, that suppliers there's almost a sense that they go like, these are my customers, right? But they're not real bright, or like there's a feeling that some of these supply chain companies are larger than the builders by many folds of magnitude, but they realize that they have to continue to do whatever they have to do to get that customer.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting dynamic. They and some of the supply and manufacturer roles I've worked in have had varying degrees of cooperation with their clients. Lots of them are very much adversarial. We're going to apply a price rise. We'll give them the minimum notification period, and that'll be what it is. Whereas some have been trying to be a bit more collaborative, but the whole surrounding system has always brought them back to winners and losers kind of outcomes.
A means to an end, which is a little bit what Heidegger was talking about. He used this idea of means to an end. Now, so interestingly enough, so we won't go much further than that to say that we acknowledge that the industry is currently set up in a fairly technological attunement. Now, Heidegger's theory from working, how do you move from that relationship into something else that is probably more attuned to where we want to get to, is his idea was to reach for poetic attunement, which is, the love of truth, beauty, and goodness for its own sake. So it turns out Heidegger was also pulled a lot of his thinking from Greek philosophy, which obviously those well-known names, Socrates and those sort of people, use truth, beauty, and goodness for its own sake is at the heart. So he believes that the way to move beyond this adversarial technological attunement is to go towards a poetic attunement. Now, in difference to, so if I use those words, love of truth, beauty, goodness for its own sake, is anything currently in the building or finance industry working with that in mind?
Wouldn't think so.
It's really interesting to me that it stands out when it occurs. Very recently, we've had some conversation around the NDIA, and aside from the very large dollars involved and the concern about this increasing budget required year on year, there has been some conversation around they use the phrase, it's still framed in financial lens, but they use this phrase of human capital and the 600,000 people assisted by the NDIA program and those positive human outcomes. So we just don't have enough language that we use that fluently or frequently or everywhere. And there are a few countries that use an happiness index. And New Zealand has recently started using a happiness measure for an economic KPI.
I wonder what the measure of happiness is.
Well, it's I think Finland has been doing it really well for a really long time.
Yes.
So some of the Nordic countries have a longer experience of doing it. And New Zealand is trying to incorporate it into their metric only in the last Prime Minister's term, so very recent history. So I think without diving into any more of the philosophy behind that, what that says is, if the antidote towards this transactional based thinking into something that is more attuned around the humans is using this idea of moving from technological attunement to poetic attunement, if we use that lens and say, how could we collaborate? If that is essentially what good collaboration could be, it's being poetically attuned to all of the groups within
what would be this situation, we then start to ask the question, which I don't think anyone else has actually asked, but, what might a builder need from this situation?
Yeah. And you
I
can
think
actually ask much better questions.
Yeah.
And they're much easier to address if we have that, value, faith alignment in the overall process, rather than being transactionally focused at every step of the way.
Absolutely. And the thing that constantly surprises me, so we've attempted to use this process specifically on Gin Road. So to say, okay, if we're going to collaborate with all the parties, let's start to ask these questions. So, and I might, as we ask these, a couple of questions before we advance further, we might even take on that role so that we can see from what lens that we can look at this collaboration. So as someone who has previously been a practitioner builder and having this conversation with a builder, we always assume this to be a you win, I lose relationship. When I had the conversation with Steve, who we're proposing might be the builder in this situation, and I asked him, well, what do you need? What are you a builder for? Now, Steve has a larger family, and he's trying to find a way to make it possible that his family can survive. Now, he didn't say, I need to go to the Bahamas. He didn't say, I need to earn $1 million a year. He didn't say, I need to have the biggest house in the street. He just said, I need to provide for my family. Now, if we think about that from a human level, who can argue with that?
That's right. Yeah.
Because we're all trying to do that, right?
I'm on his side. Let's help him do that.
100%. So once I was at that point and I said, okay, that seems pretty reasonable that you would be wanting to provide for your family. And I think you might have a family of, 5 or 6 or something like that. So in today's terms, like quite a difficult family to be able to provide for, and that doesn't cost nothing to do. I was saying, well, we've got a client who has this house to build, and it's a community project. It's about finding different ways to look at housing that makes it affordable for people to get back into the housing market, so that, like your kids, they won't feel as stressed as we did about trying to own a home and being consumed by getting a mortgage and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So his human response was, well, how can I help that?
So how can I help? Not how can I extract something out of this? How can I help? That's fascinating, isn't it? And that was his instant reaction.
Now, beyond that, when we started to have these conversations, obviously we have human needs out of this, right? So he's got on this side this tension of, I've got to provide with my family, and hey, this is something that I would feel aligned with. So I talked about the idea that we're trying to make it affordable, because the more affordable it is, the better it is for everyone. And then obviously you get to the correlation of what is affordability. He could quite clearly see we're going to have a conversation about, well, how much money do I make? Because my goal here is to provide for my family. So then you start to have conversations which are about human needs. So he said, I'd love to help. I get the idea of it. And I could empathize with the fact you got to make enough money to look after your family. And he said, my problem is every time I take on a project at a lower margin, because my license is tied by total turnover in a year, that's one less.
Explain that, please, because I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so in Queensland in particular, once you reach a class of license, that class of license will then have a financial stipulation to it. So
you have a certain amount of capital.
The regulator.
$1 million worth of building, you have to have a certain amount of capital, just as though you would for any loan or any business or anything. You have to have financial standing that we can understand that you can finish the project even if things go wrong. Is that it?
Correct, 100%. So they call it, within the industry, it's called a liquidity ratio. So you need to have a certain number that your accountant verifies that says, regardless of your class of license, so I have the right to build this sort of building, I still need to have the financial testing to be able to get this level of license. So his concern was, every time I do a job at a lower margin, which I'm interested in having the conversation because I see the advantage for the greater community conversation, it takes away from my ability to provide for my family. So when we have a look at this lens, we can then say, and I didn't have the answers, but I said, look, we may be able to, with this client, look at alternative ways of doing this contracting so that maybe we don't affect your licensing financial impacts as much as you would in a normal build. So I think that conversation is ultimately a poetic attunement or a collaboration that's occurring between a builder. And in this situation, we were operating as the project manager or the middle person, essentially, to try and break down those things. But essentially, we're using the systems and the process set out in our toolkit to be able to start that conversation. So then we say, if this is a conversation between the builder, what does a client need? So putting it over to you, Christine, as the client, from the purpose of, so what exactly are you needing out of this project?
Well, if I put myself in the position of who we think are going to be the typical, I don't think we'll be attracting anybody who's typical, but the typical person that or the sort of avatar of the person that we sort of are thinking might be interested.
Yeah.
They might, I think they might say, well, I need an affordable place to live that makes me also feel good. I mean, affordability is sort of at the top of my hierarchy, but my next thing down is, I don't want to live in a shit place, and I don't want to live with shit people, and I don't want to have to, or I don't want to live with anybody, or all I want to do is live with somebody else, whatever it is. How is that? It's the amenity of the place, not just the price that I think people would want. That certainly is the case for me.
Yep.
To my mind, that's a really important point, that we talk about the language and the default setting of affordability. Yeah. Everyone has a very different definition about what affordability actually means. Yeah. So it's not the same dollars per week for everybody. No. If you live in Bondi and the average, house there is a $4.5 million property, for you an affordable meal might be $120 at the fine steak restaurant. You think that's quite affordable? It's a weeknight. I'm not going to go over the top. Whereas in the tablelands, where rental vacancies are below 0.2%, desperation stakes, and income levels are necessarily down, and property isn't the same level. A Hungry Jack's drive-through at $12 is not an affordable meal.
I'm not sure that anyone on the Tablelands has ever offered a meal for $120 because there'd be no takers. Just nobody would turn up. They would have priced themselves right out of the market, which indicates something about disposable incomes here and who can afford what kind of rent. If you can't afford a $120 meal, you certainly aren't going to be able to afford $600 a week rent.
Yeah. And I think your point is well raised, though, Rowan. Like everything is relative, right? So wherever you are in the world, and that's why we also think that people purpose place could be initially most beneficial to those people in the regions, because the pressure in the regions is so much higher because, there isn't the disposable incomes. People aren't going out there and doing those things. But if I asked you that same question, and I think we'll come back to we probably need to ask the question of separating out the client, as in the person who's having the transaction with the builder, and then, you know, what do they need, and then what does the person who's the end occupant, who's in the household, in the home hold, they're actually two different groups of needs. So if it's okay, if we focused originally on the builder's got to transact with someone who would be the client or the person who would have the general traditional contract with, you know, what is the owner of a property going to want from a builder? Like what are their needs from a builder?
Now we're to answer that in real time, are we? Or you want us to answer?
Well, yeah. What might be things that would be important for someone who's actually going to purchase a home from a builder?
Well, that they'd feel that the builder would be reliable, honest, capable of working their craft, capable of organizing their systems, capable of getting the job done on time and on budget.
Yep.
But if you think about what you really want, you know, gee, wouldn't I my builder to not only provide all of that, but be a lovely bloke, you know? And of course, then I could say, well, I'd really like to have a woman build my house. Because we're just making the assumption that all builders are men, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, you know, just in that short space of time, how many assumptions were there? And the most glaring one was that all people who are in the building industry are men. Crap. But so I didn't even mention the thought that, oh, you know, the person I want to build my house, I wanted to have a little bit of a feel for houses. Maybe men don't have the same feel as women. So maybe I want a woman's sensibility. And I've dragged us off in a funny direction, but you know, these are all the assumptions that we're stacking together. And this is the hard bit. So you can't even get to by asking the question, you can't even get to what I really want, because it sits deeper inside me than my ready answer is going to be.
But the good thing is, if I was a builder, if I was your builder and you had said to me, and I had been listening and I'd been attuned to what you're saying, and you'd said that I need you to build a quality home, as a builder, you go, yeah, that's fair and reasonable, right? Like, you're not asking me to jump, and you haven't said to me, you want the cheapest price. You haven't said to me, you want me to make no money. You haven't said to me any of those things. And you've also pointed out something that is, you want me to be sensitive to the role that I play in your builder and be open to your greater understanding of building other than just building bits. Now, as a builder, I can tell you, I would love to hear that, because quite often builders see that everyone turns them into how many doors can you install, whereas at some level, they see what they do as a craft, and they would love to have someone say, I appreciate you wanting to have a craft, and would actually be intrigued by, well, how does a woman see building? And how is that different from how I see building?
Right.
And I think that they would really want to know that, because, you know, that would help them feel valuable in this process. One of the things I find with builders is they don't feel valued for what they do. Now, you've just given an explanation of what value might be.
Of course, you can't feel in an adversarial situation. It's very difficult to feel valued, because the whole point is that you're having a fight. Somebody's got to win. So, you know, appreciation of value of another person means almost that you have to step out of an adversarial situation. And building houses, the way I understand it, I've not built one, but I understand that much of housing building is adversarial between the builder and the buildee, so to speak.
And for us in the people purpose place, that's the whole mechanism and the framework to support this ongoing. So it's not guesswork and a one-off. It's a replicable set of tools that we pick up the ones we need to how do we form agreements? How do we have this builder alignment? How do we have this conversation that gets us onto the same page? And then when we veer off on our own random distraction, as we do, how do we guide that back onto path?
Or when we veer off the hierarchy or adversarial positions, then you have to find a way back to your own humanity and the builder's own humanity, or you, the buildee, and they, the builder.
Yes.
Yeah. And quite often, one of the things that's probably missed with that is most of those small to medium sized builders. So if you talk about building companies up to sort of maybe $4 or $5 million in turnover, historically, all of those are made up of husband and wife teams.
Are they?
So when you said, builders are historically men, the truth is they're quite often couples, if the truth be said. And
table lands.
Yeah, and truthfully, when you said, "Hey, I would really like a woman's sensibilities in this construction system," if his wife heard that, she would be like, "Yes, I want to be involved." And at the moment, I'm doing administration, but if I could be more intimately involved with this customer, hopefully we could get a greater understanding of what you're trying to achieve and be more open to the sensibilities of that. So. And again, what you said before is if that's humanizing this interaction and turning it away from purely being that transactional based thing, it's into we're two humans who have got needs we're trying to get met. And I haven't seen anything unreasonable. Like none of us have said, like there hasn't been the builder say, I want to make $150,000, and you haven't said I'm going to screw this guy into the ground so I can make the most amount of money. And then the third party of this, which we feel is missed so much, and that's why we put people first, is the people who end up living in this. You started to talk about that, but if we put ourselves into the position of the person who might live there and we imagined ourselves in Ginn Road, what would be our needs? We talked about affordability and our capability to live there, but what would be our other needs that would need to be taken care of if we were going to be in this homehold of Ginn Road? Rowan?
Security and understanding of tenure.
Understanding of tenure. Yep, that makes sense.
Probably at the front of the queue, and then we probably get on to a space for communion. So if you have friends or guests, or you want to have a conversation, that doesn't have to be on the end of your bed or in your own private space, but in a space for conversation around a fireplace, or on the deck overlooking some views.
Got anything else to add there, Christine?
I'm coming up with a blank because one side of me wants to go off into this very ethereal, spiritual stuff, and one side of me just keeps getting dragged back into the hierarchical stuff. I want this object and that look and that kind of thing, as opposed to, So yes, Rowan, thank you. Yeah, I think you nailed it.
And maybe if you indulge me for a second, could we maybe just take even 10 or 15 seconds to sit with how a home should feel and then come back and answer that question?
Yep.
Do you want us to do that right now?
Why not?
Just go quiet on the podcast. That'll challenge a few folks. I just fell right into it. It was.
Yeah, me too.
You say first, Darren. Go for it.
I had a couple of things, which is a sense of peace, and also I had images come to me of, and which is funny when I was thinking about what it would be to be home, was a sense of calm and peacefulness but also a sense of fun with groups. So those times when we've been able to interact with others, and that's been joyful and fulfilling and connected. So, and I think that might have been because I used the word home, but the people who I was seeing weren't necessarily only my family. So contentedness, connectedness, calm.
How about you, Christine? Where do you get to?
I just fell right into, I want it to be something so different to the house I was brought up in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And what the house I was brought up in, it didn't lack aesthetics, it didn't lack convenience, it didn't lack mod cons, it didn't lack any of that. It had beautiful colors, it had beautiful style, it had beautiful. But the only thing I want from that house, I don't want that house. I don't want its tidiness. I don't want its hyper cleanliness. I don't want its hard edges. I don't want its straight lines. I want all the greenery around it.
Wow.
Because I would feel unsafe in a place that was too hygienic, too perfect, too straight lines, too little greenery. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Rowan?
Too little.
Is it interesting you're living in the wet tropics now, Christine?
Well, and I'm living in a house that I'm living in an old Queensland. You know, this is a 30s, 40s Queensland government building that was moved here and plunked into its site, and it's just surrounded by rainforest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've just gone and reconstructed all the beautiful parts of my childhood and left out all the straight lines and the hyper cleanliness and the coldness. So I want a feeling of warmth, of security, of safety, of calm, of peace. But I want a feeling of being real.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really thank you for that, Darren, because I mean, I haven't gone that deeply into that thought. I have had that thought most of my life, but I haven't gone that deeply into it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Very cool.
So,
Rowan?
Yeah.
The comfort or the feeling for me that came out was being on the couch under a blanket on a cold winter's afternoon, where you know you're in good company and it's safe and secure, and there's not a pressing need to get out and do something. So the whole ability to be still and just be.
And be warm and cozy
And interestingly enough, like we're talking about collaboration in building, but we just talked before about what the client, the owner of the project, might want. Now, if you were the owner of that project and you had the people who are moving into that project said, that's all I want from the place I'm going to rent or live or whatever, how would that change your perspective, how you looked at those people?
if they had similar aspirations, deep aspirations.
So if you were the investor, rather than being another tenant, if the 5 people who were moving into your property, you had just heard what they said they wanted from a home, how would that change your perspective on those potential tenants? If they just said, I just want to be safe, I just want to feel like I'm connected, I just want to feel like I'm protected, it would completely change the way you looked at those tenants.
I think there's no question that would just so warm my heart that I would look at them differently. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we hope, both collaboration and poetic attunement changes our view of everyone in this process. So if we've just said, we've got a builder who wants to care for his family.
Yeah.
So he has some certain needs that need to be met financially. We've got a customer who says, I need it to be built in a way that's correct and of a certain way, but I also have some deeper underlying sensibilities which I would like expressed in my home, and I feel the need to be heard. Like I feel the need for my deeper understanding of housing to be heard. And then we had the people who eventually habitated that house say, we just really want to be safe. On some level, we also want to find that place. I'm reading in between these lines here, but almost like we want the perfect childhood protection that goes with growing up in a place that makes you feel good and connected and home. And we still had a lot of discussions about interaction and community. Now, if that picture is painted and everyone sees everyone as a human, I don't not think collaboration could not work if you held on to that view of each other during that process.
Yeah, to me, it's end-to-end connected around the humanity of what we're trying to do. So from start to finish, with the end in mind, we are wanting human connectedness and outcomes that is consistent for the investor, for the builder, for the end resident, and for us, it also endures beyond any of those single transactions. So to a degree, there's a building process that takes 12 or 18 months. So there's a start and a finish to that. But we also want it to endure beyond that time. So a tenant or a home holder will want to live there for a period of time. That might be an REIQ 12 months. It might be until they have children, or until they repart, or until the end of their days. It might actually be quite a substantial chapter of their life.
Yeah.
And this is still connected consistently the whole way through.
Yep.
Rather than a series of win-losses and transactional, hierarchical interactions.
Absolutely. And I think, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I think our role, more and more we say it, our role is to change how we think about housing to how we feel about being home.
Absolutely.
Boy, I think you've nailed it there, Darren. I think we've come to the end of the podcast. I mean, that's just that. I wonder what this is going to sound like when we finish, when we go back and look at it. About like disconnected mad people who are taking drugs?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Or maybe there's enough common thread there to understand that if the building industry currently is this adversarial way of doing things, if a tenth of what we're saying is possible, why wouldn't you want to do that? Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why wouldn't you?
We're not aiming perfection. The industry already doesn't aim for perfection. The industry is only looking for minimum compliance.
But providing what the industry at this point and what society at this point does not offer.
Yeah.
Connectedness, safety, feeling of security, feeling of calm and peace. Those are all things that this society says you're not getting that.
No.
Our idea is
just
scared.
a little bit.
I mean, it's not about how do you feel within yourself or within your own four walls.
Yeah. So true. So true. I think your statement about, moving from housing to homing is absolutely what our role is. And once you get to that point, then the rest of the relationships can be sorted out. The builder meeting his needs, the client who's the investor meeting their needs, and the people moving in there saying, I just want a home. I just want to feel safe and secure. And then from that place, I know I can be a better person and I can help society. Who's arguing with any of those steps?
Yeah. And if we stop and think about the history of humanity and everything that we know about the way human beings' nervous systems are wired, the only way for a human being to feel safe is to be connected to other human beings.
100%.
The because you look at the uncountable bajillionaires who are all rushing over to the other side of the earth to buy up places where they can build bunkers in New Zealand. Well, they aren't feeling safe, are they?
No, not even there.
They're going to a place where there's a lot of feeling of safety. I mean, that's a great country.
Yeah.
But they're looking for something they can't buy.
It's right there.
They would turn up and it wouldn't be there because it comes out of here. It doesn't come out of your house or your fortune or your anything else. But an unconnected human is not a safe or a happy human or a productive. And we're trying to pretend that we can turn humans into the AI machines that we were never meant to be.
I wonder what Heidegger would think now.
I suspected this shit was going to come down.
I told you in 1930, you idiots.
I can't say that in 19th century German.
It'd sound aggressive.
Transpose it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be very complimentary, that's for sure.
I don't think so.
No.
Well, I don't know whether we've made any sense, but it seems like we've got to the end of the loop there, and I feel like we did cover some really important stuff. And being my checkout, I get to go first. I do feel like we got across the importance of what it is to listen to all the humans in the process, and the importance of a home. So, thanks for that.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, my checkout would be, I think I've been so inspired. I mean, we've known each other a long time, but since I've come on board with the two of you who had the concept for People Purpose Place, I've understood better and better what you're aiming at, but I do think that the whole concept is expanding and becoming more closer to beauty, truth, and goodness. So
awesome.
I feel as though I've understood the whole project better in this hour than I have in the 3 years previous.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
That may be only me. Everybody else may be mystified, but I feel like I understand the whole thing better at this point. Way better. And I feel it.
Oh, awesome. That's the most important part.
Yeah.
And thank you. I think although we have gone around a bit and they are weighty concepts, absolutely, I think if you can sit undistracted and with this conversation, there's absolutely some gold dust in there.
Yeah.
That is much better than being the handful of billionaires trying to retreat from the planet to an exotic New Zealand location to build their bunker. If that's our end game for humanity, or to be continue to plug into a system as a servant of AI, then there's got to be a better way. And the potential in a better way, that excites me. Like, to fulfill people's true human potential just gives me goosebumps. So let's continue to do that.
Yeah, it makes me excited hearing you say that.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Namaste. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you again next week, folks, at lunchtime with People Purpose Place. And I believe we've got a guest next week, which will be Stella, who is quite a stellar performer in so many ways.
Awesome.
Stay tuned. Thank you.
See you later. Thank you.